Welcome to Peace Now. My name is Trudy Quaife. I'm a member of Bethlehem Neighbors for Peace. We're a local organization of friends and neighbors. We've been advocating for peace and justice for the past decade. Joining me today is Mari Matsuo. She's a local activist. She's been involved with the peace movement, with the anti-hydrofracking movement, and many other issues, actually. So thank you for joining me today, Mari.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so glad you're here. I wonder if we could start out talking a little bit about how you became an activist and why you became an activist. Would you want to talk about that a little?
Sure. Well, I think, I always cared a little bit about, social justice. I always had a problem with racism. I always thought, war was bad. But I didn't really know enough about it to ever really do anything. And, especially when I was in high school, in the beginning of college, I was like a lot of other people my age. I really just cared about partying and shopping and stuff like that. Then I started taking some sociology classes at SUNY, which really kind of helped shape my current way of thinking. I started questioning some of the narratives that are very popular in our culture, and just started doing a lot of research on my own time, reading, doing documentaries, and that really made me become aware of a lot of the issues that I'm involved in today. And I went to my first protest at the end of 2011, and I pretty much haven't stopped ever since.
Good. Now, do you think it made a difference, that first protest? Did it make a difference to you?
Definitely. It was at the United Nations in New York City, and it was for voting rights. And I was really scared going down there, just because, it was my first time, but also because, I'd seen over the past year just the amount of violence being used against unarmed, peaceful protesters in our country. So, it was in the back of my mind. I was a little scared. But after I went, I got to connect with a lot of really cool people who, they're really inspirational. And I also feel like it was really empowering knowing that, I was able to do this, and even though I was scared, it turned out to be okay. And I think that the issues being raised that day and at all the other protests I've gone to are really important. And so I think that, taking the risk that could come with protesting is definitely worth the accomplishments in the long run.
Okay, now why do you think it's important to speak out?
For a variety of reasons. I think, first of all, it's important to speak out because there's just so many issues facing us in this country today that people are unhappy with and are causing suffering for a lot of people. And so I think it's important to challenge these things in a variety of ways, whether it's trying to educate other people one-on-one, going to protests, contacting representatives in Congress, trying to pass legislation. I think there's a variety of ways to go about it, but I think it's something that everybody, has a responsibility to do, is get involved in some type of issue or movement and, contribute some kind of effort to make the world better, not just for themselves, but for other people too.
We don't see a lot of information about these issues on the news, at least on the mass media. How do you find out about what's going on? What are your sources of information?
I actually use a variety of sources. One that, might be kind of surprising is social media, because I know a lot of people think that things like Facebook and Twitter are just like, a waste of time and people just post, stupid cat videos and whatever. But I actually feel like if you, connect with the right people and the right organizations on social media, it can actually be a really good way to find out a variety of different topics and news and information that you wouldn't see by just watching TV. There's a lot of great activists that are online, and then a lot of great news organizations and publications also. And then besides that, I think just just doing research on my own time, just buying books, just Googling stuff, and then also just talking to other activists. Like, I think one-on-one communication is a great way to expand the different perspectives you're exposed to and, find out a variety of information.
Could you talk a little bit about how you put information out there for other people to see? I know that you do that a lot, and a lot of our viewers are older people and really don't know how the social media works. Could you just talk a little bit about how you use social media?
I actually spend a lot of my time, sharing information on social media because one of my big goals is getting people in my generation more involved in these issues, and I know that social media is huge among people my age, so I feel like it's a really good way to reach them as an audience. So on both my Facebook and my Twitter, I post a lot of the articles that I read that I find to be very informative and that might present information that's not seen if all you do is watch CNN and the mainstream TV channels and read mainstream papers. And also, if I ever see a documentary or an online broadcast that I feel is useful, I post those as well. And I also, anytime I read a new book that I feel like really helped, help like open my eyes to a bunch of new things, I always, put a picture of the book up and, little brief summary, just because I know that, a lot of people, they might not take the time to do this research on their own time, but if they're exposed to it on social media, that just makes it really easy for them. So yeah, I actually think that social media has been a really good tool for me in helping to educate other people.
Good. All right, let's talk about some of the issues that you have been involved in. I know I've seen you at lots of protests and demonstrations. I've even seen you interviewed on the news. So let's talk a little bit about some of the events that you've attended.
Sure.
I know I've seen you over at the Four Corners many times, vigiling with Bethlehem Neighbors for Peace on Monday nights. What's that like?
So I've been vigiling on Mondays with Bethlehem Neighbors for Peace for a little less than a year now. And I really enjoy it. I think that it's definitely been a huge inspiration for me to be around activists. Like, most of the people that are there at Bethlehem Neighbors for Peace, you guys have been there every week for 10 years, and just the dedication has been a huge inspiration to me. And I think, just the discussion I have with my fellow activists there also has helped me learn a lot of things that, again, I probably wouldn't have actually been exposed to if I hadn't had these conversations. And I also think that, again, it's empowering to be, taking a stand for something that's, very important to you. And the issue of, educating people about the wars and ending these wars is pretty much one of the most important things in my life right now. So I really enjoy being able to have the chance to do it. And I think it's a good way, not just to meet other people who are interested in the same things I am, but a good way to raise awareness. It's like we're standing on a corner with signs. So many people are just driving by. And I think that, some of them probably drive by and don't really think twice, but, if even one person drives by and sees us and then goes home and thinks about it or starts asking questions, starts doing research, I think that, that small impact is very important. So.
Okay, another event I know you attended not too long ago, I think it was in the spring, was the anti-drone rally out at Hancock Field in Syracuse.
Yeah.
Now, I know a number of people were arrested there. I don't think you were arrested.
No, luckily no.
Is there anything you'd want to say about that rally? What was different about that?
Yeah, that was actually really interesting. So, anti-drone is one of the movements that is also very important to me. Both the use of drones overseas, for surveillance and for, killing people, most of the time innocent people. I think that's important, but also, the push towards using them for surveillance and possible, non-lethal action here at home is very important too. So this protest was at Hancock Air Base near Syracuse, which is one of the places where drones are actually operated from. And so there was hundreds of people there, and we marched from a starting point near the base to the actual gates of the base. And there was a certain line that was considered trespassing if you crossed it, and several obviously peaceful demonstrators crossed that line, and so they were arrested. And I mean, we're talking about people in wheelchairs, we're talking about Vietnam veterans. So I just feel like the way that it was handled was, very telling of the times that we're living in. But I think it also sent a powerful message, not just to people, on the outside who read about it or heard about it, but also to the people, who were working on the base, operating the drones, the fact that you have Vietnam veterans telling them, what you're doing is wrong, you're causing harm to innocent people. And when you kill innocent people in other countries, that makes people in those countries feel a sense of animosity towards America that endangers us here. So I think that was a really important message for these young men and women to actually hear, especially from, veterans who, are very respected.
Yeah.
I think it was important.
That's a good point. Another one of the events that you participated in that I was particularly impressed with was this summer when you walked from, well, you participated a couple days. I think you walked from somewhere near Albany to somewhere near Binghamton with Lynn Jackson and members of the
Yes.
Muslim Solidarity Committee. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so that was actually called the Journey for Justice, and a local activist named Lynn Jackson walked 133 miles from Albany to Binghamton to deliver a petition to a judge. And this petition was based on the fact that several years ago, an Albany imam at a local mosque was convicted of terrorism-related charges due to kind of like a sting operation that was set up by the FBI. So he filed a Freedom of Information request for his files because he was actually convicted using secret evidence that neither him or his attorney were allowed to see. So when he was finally granted access to this secret evidence, it turns out that the FBI had him mistaken for a man who was killed in 2010. And so the petition basically just said, since this guy was killed in 2010, it's obviously not the person who you claim he is, so can you please reopen this case and re-examine his conviction, because he's sitting in prison in horrible conditions, and he has a family, he has little kids. So, basically Lynn walked around, 10 to 13 miles a day. I joined her on the first day, and I joined her 2 other days later on her trip. And I, for several reasons, I just think that, the fact that anybody could be prosecuted using secret evidence that, neither they nor their attorney are allowed to see, that goes against, multiple things that this country is supposed to stand for, not to mention, obviously we're entitled to due process, and that is clearly not due process. But I think also it speaks to the larger issue of just the extreme persecution and attacking of just anyone who is believed to be Muslim or looks like they're from the Middle East in the wake of 9/11, to some extent by just everyday people, but especially by our government, whether it's the NYPD spying on Muslims in New York City or just, setting up, random innocent people like this man in Albany, Yasin Aref. I just think it's a huge problem, and so I wanted to do something to not just, take a stand against it, but also to raise awareness. And I thought, this woman making this really long trip on foot was a great way to, grab people's attention, and I'm really happy that I was able to be a part of it.
I'm so glad you were. I'm so impressed that you went.
Oh, thank you.
Now, there's some other events that you've been involved in. I know I've seen you standing on the corner, I think, in maybe over on Wolf Road, with a sign, "No attack on Syria." So that's another issue I think that's close to your heart.
Yes, that's actually the build up to a war on Syria has been a huge issue for me recently. I feel that there's a lot of misconceptions being put out there about Syria, a lot of disinformation, and no matter, I feel like at the end of the day, no matter who it turns out really was responsible for using chemical weapons, us intervening militarily would only, largely kill more innocent people, and I think that, really at this point, a diplomatic solution and a ceasefire is really the only legitimate solution. We've already been sending money and weapons to the Syrian opposition, who in many instances are either affiliated with Al-Qaeda or other equally extremist groups, and in many instances they've been just as violent as President Assad and his forces. So I think our support for them is, morally wrong and also dangerous. I mean, we fight Al-Qaeda around the world, and we're helping them in Syria.
Right.
But also I just feel like, the idea that the U.S. has the, solo right to just invade a country or attack a country based on the use of chemical weapons is extremely hypocritical. The United States is responsible for more chemical weapons attacks than any other country in the world, whether, it was using Agent Orange in Vietnam, whether it was, helping Saddam Hussein use chemical weapons against Iran and then against the Kurds in his own country. or our use of chemical weapons in the forms of white phosphorus and depleted uranium, which we dropped on Iraq. All of these examples,
Good point.
it's just kind of hard for us to say, oh, well, using chemical weapons is wrong, and if you do it, we're going to invade you, when it's like, well, we do it all the time. And when our allies, like Israel, use chemical weapons such as white phosphorus on the people of Palestine, we don't have a problem then. So I just really feel like on all levels, this is just, morally wrong. It's hypocritical. And I mean, honestly, this country, economically, we can't afford another war. We're already, trillions of dollars in debt still, and a large amount of that came from the money we spent on the last 12 years of war. So I just think on all levels it's just the total wrong thing to do.
Okay, well, good. Can you think of any other events that you've attended, rallies, demonstrations, conferences, anything like that that made a particular difference to you, that you thought really helped you to understand the issues?
Yeah, definitely. One of the real defining moments I think that kind of got me into activism was in the spring of 2012. I went to the United National Anti-War, or UNAC, convention in Connecticut, and it was just a great opportunity to meet all different kinds of people from all over the world who cared about the same issues that I care about. And I went to a lot of really great workshops. I learned a lot. And that actually also brought me into contact with Bethlehem Neighbors for Peace, which has been really instrumental in, pushing me forward as an activist. So I think that was like a really important moment. I think, I go to, demonstrations on a pretty much weekly basis in the capital region, and maybe once a month down in New York City. So I just think, every time I go to a demonstration, that kind of like strengthens my resolve and my commitment to these issues. And again, it's always just such a great place to meet new people and connect with people that I probably wouldn't have run into otherwise. And I think a really good example of that also is the anti-fracking protests that have been going on in Albany. That's a really big issue to me too. And I see a lot of young people coming there, and it's, the few fracking protests I've gone to here have been, thousands of people from all over New York and some of the surrounding states where fracking has already been approved and started. And it brings together people from all different backgrounds, young people, old people, city people, farmers, people from upstate, downstate, all over. I think, things like that, people can really find a common ground. And it doesn't really matter, like, necessarily what your politics or your religion or your, economic beliefs are. Just certain issues, I feel like, are just so damaging to so many people that it's really just a great way to have people all fight for a common cause.
I didn't mention before, but in the last show we did was on hydrofracking, and we actually used one of the photos you took this summer at the hydrofracking conference. It was a really wonderful photo. So that's one more thing I think that you've done that's really made a huge contribution, is all the photos you've taken at all these different events. I
just use my cell phone. Like, I don't even have a real camera, but it's like anytime I go to a protest or a demonstration or even just a speech by one of my favorite activists, I always try to take pictures, just, so people can know what's going on, but also so I want to get people my age to realize, it's not just old hippies that protest, like, it's young people. And, really, I look at the days of Vietnam and the civil rights protests, and so many of these actions were led by students and young people. And it's like, I look at, a lot of the, the anti-war movement, a lot of the civil liberties movements going on today, and I don't see a lot of young people. And so one of my things is I really want to get my peers involved. And I feel like if I post pictures of myself protesting or myself at these events, that's a good way to, get people to realize, it is something that, people like me do. And, if Mari can do it, I can do it too. So I really feel like it's just, one more way to raise awareness and encourage other people to get involved.
Let's talk a little bit about your heroes. I know I asked you this question one time before. Who are your heroes, Mari? How did you become motivated to get so involved?
I have so many. I think, originally a couple of my, just general inspirational heroes were just, people who I felt like, took a stand not just to improve the conditions of their own life, but especially to help those people who are oppressed or for whatever reason aren't capable of speaking out for themselves. So, people like, Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, even, when I was younger, I still am a huge hip hop person. So growing up, Tupac and his music was always a big inspiration to me. But as I became more and more involved in activism, there's also a couple of people that I feel like have also really been a more recent inspiration to me. I think Noam Chomsky, which, for a lot of people, has been a start for, activism. I read some stuff by him in sociology class, and it really just got me thinking, that the idea of America as, a voice of freedom and democracy and always, sticking up for, human rights around the world, maybe that's not quite as true as I was led to believe. And so I think he really just got me started down the path of asking questions. And then also I would say, writers like Chris Hedges, Naomi Klein, just, the narrative that they present, again, kind of just questioning the systems of power in this country and, giving a voice to the oppressed people here and around the world. Their work has been really instrumental to me. And then there are two journalists whose work definitely changed my life, and that would be Glenn Greenwald and Jeremy Scahill. And, they write books, they do articles, interviews. Jeremy Scahill recently did a documentary called Dirty Wars, and a book that's, like 500 pages long. And I think both of those are just huge accomplishments. And I think, him and Glenn Greenwald both, they take an enormous risk by, exposing truths that, our government definitely doesn't want people to know about, which I think makes it even more important for them to be exposed. So I think just the bravery and dedication of both of those people has definitely been a great inspiration to me. And also just everyday activists, people I meet, and then also activists in other countries I follow on Twitter, like the Al-Khawaja family in Bahrain, or just even people from Bethlehem Neighbors for Peace, just anyone who, takes a stand for themselves and other people and tries to make the world better, I think.
Okay. What would you say the most important issues of today are for you? What are the issues that you are most likely to take notice of and feel that we need to do something about?
I think just generally educating people and pushing to end all of the wars that we're involved in, and really just a lot of the more covert military actions we're taking in countries like Pakistan, Yemen, and Somalia, where we're not even officially at war, but we're killing lots of people with drones and using a lot of special ops there and a bunch of other countries. But just war in general, I think, is very important, not just because of what act out there causes more, devastation and suffering than war, but also just the extreme effect that it's having on our country here at home, the fact that we're so much in debt. And it's like if we used even half of the money that we spent on weapons and war, if we used that money for, anything, it could be education, healthcare, infrastructure, there's an endless list of things that I feel like, we could better spend this money on than killing people. But also I feel like, as I mentioned before, when we do all these wars and these military operations, when innocent people die, in the name of American wars or American freedom, I think that really has a harmful effect on the way America as a country is viewed. I mean, one of my favorite signs I've seen at a protest was bombing people creates terrorists. And I think that pretty much sums it up.
I agree.
And outside of that, I would just say a huge issue is just the lack of, there's just not enough people who are taking a stand and speaking out. I think the lack of awareness is a huge problem. Just not just on anti-war, but on any issue, whether it's environmental, like fracking, or, more to do with like food and health, like GMOs and Monsanto, or, even civil liberties here at home, the indefinite detention of Americans that is allowed through the NDAA, the surveillance state, which we all have heard about by now with the NSA, just a wide varieties. I feel like there's just so many things going wrong right now that anybody could find something that, affects them and that they feel is important enough to speak out. And I think that, people are scared to speak out because they're scared of the, blowback that could come to them from the government or from their peers. But I just feel that, if your friends criticize you for taking a stand, they're not really your friends. And if the government has a problem with you speaking the truth and, demonstrating peacefully, I think that shows that there's not a problem with you, that there's a problem with our government, and that's even more of a reason for you to take a stand.
How are we going to get more young people? I don't think that most young college-educated people like yourself are as well informed as you are. How are we going to inform people? How are we going to get them to pay attention to these issues?
I think just really, just finding different ways to engage them, like again, through social media, through just one-on-one conversation, dialogue, and just really driving home how urgent these issues are and how they really do, it's not just some abstract concept, it really is affecting all of us. Just finding different ways to approach different people. Everybody's going to be motivated by something different, so just finding what is that one issue for people.
Right, and to get started on that. Speaking of that, there's one issue that's really not in the mainstream media hardly at all these days. We only have about 3 minutes left, so the question I wanted to ask is, I believe your father was born in Japan, so I thought you might have an interest in this, in what's going on at Fukushima right now with the nuclear reactor.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting, again, that our media here has time to talk about celebrity gossip and who got caught naked, but they don't have, any time to talk about the fact that there's a huge ongoing nuclear disaster in Japan, radiation still leaking at alarming amounts. And I think it's just a perfect example of, how that not only do we need to eliminate nuclear weapons, but we really need to find better sources of energy than nuclear power, because it's just not worth the risk, as we're seeing more and more.
Okay. How can people follow you to see what you're doing?
I would say the best way to, get in contact with me and just kind of keep posted on the different activist, things I'm involved in, would be to follow me on Twitter. And my name is just at Mari_Matsuo. And I'm on there pretty much every day posting articles, information about local protests, and a bunch of other things that have to do with politics and human rights. And it's a great way, like I said, to just find other activists too. So I'd say that would be good.
Okay. What issues do you think you'll be working on in the future? Do you have any other ideas of things that we haven't covered here? We're almost out of time, but we have about a minute.
Like I said, there's just so many, but I see for the next, foreseeable future that most of the issues I'm currently involved in are still going to be a problem. So, just generally anti-war. I'm definitely, very concerned about drones, about fracking, just about the erosion of our rights and freedoms here at home. And, there are specific, countries that I'm, again, worried about us attacking Syria, also just the long-term stuff we're doing against Iran. A big issue for me, too, is our support for what Israel is doing in Palestine. There's just so many things. Yeah.
Lots to work on.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for joining me here today, Mari. It was such a pleasure to talk with you, and I hope you'll come back and talk again, because there's so many more topics that we could talk about. You're so articulate and well-informed. Such a pleasure.
Yes, I appreciate you having me. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for joining us today, and I hope you'll join us again for future programs. We will be talking about other topics, including how the war economy has affected our local and national economies. We'll be talking about the prison at Guantanamo Bay. I'm sure we'll talk more about hydrofracking and the war in Syria, so please join us for future shows. Thank you.
Bring them home, bring them home, bring our parents, our children home, from the dust of Afghanistan back to our arms, bring them home.
Bring them home, bring them home, bring our sons and our daughters home, from the ghettos of Baghdad back to our arms, bring them home.
Bring them home, bring them home, bring our brothers, our sisters home, from Nasiriyah back to our arms, bring them home.
Bring them home, bring them home, bring our friends and